The cemetery stretched out in silence, a lonely place where grief lingered like a morning fog. The autumn wind rustled the golden leaves, sending them swirling over the gravestones. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen rain, but one presence remained unmoved by the passing of time. A golden retriever lay curled at the base of a simple weathered headstone. His fur, once thick and golden, was now caked with dirt and damp from the evening dew. His ribs pressed lightly against his skin, his body weak from hunger, yet he refused to move. His name was Max, and he was waiting. For 14 days he had stayed at the grave of his owner, Henry, the only person he had ever truly belonged to. It didn't matter that Henry had been lowered into the ground, that the people had come and gone, offering their condolences, their prayers, their flowers. Max didn't understand any of it. All he knew was that one day, Henry was there, and the next, he wasn't, and Max wasn't leaving until he came back. Max had been Henry's shadow for 5 years. The old carpenter had found him at a local shelter, a trembling puppy in the back of a kennel, abandoned like an old shoe. Henry had knelt down, whistled softly, and Max had lifted his head, those brown eyes searching for something, someone to trust. From that moment on, they had been inseparable. Henry took Max everywhere. Morning walks by the lake, afternoons in his workshop, evenings spent dozing together by the fireplace. Henry spoke to Max as if he were human, and Max in his own way understood. So when Henry suffered a sudden heart attack in his sleep, Max didn't understand why he never woke up, why the men in uniforms came and took him away, why Henry's scent lingered on his favorite chair, but was fading with every passing day. Max had followed the casket to the cemetery, sitting quietly beside Henry's family as they lowered him into the ground. But when everyone left, Max stayed. At first, people tried to take him home. Henry's neighbor, Mr. Aldridge, had knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "Come on, boy, let's get you somewhere warm." But Max had simply turned his head back toward the grave. He wasn't leaving, not yet. The cemetery caretaker, Mr. Benson, had grown used to seeing Max there every morning when he made his rounds. He left out bowls of food and water, though Max barely touched them. The town's children brought blankets, hoping to coax him into warmth, but Max only curled tighter into himself, pressing his body against the cold earth as if trying to feel Henry's warmth one last time. The days turned into weeks. The weather grew colder. The rain came, soaking Max's fur until he shivered under the oak tree that towered over Henry's grave. But still, he stayed. And then, on the 15th night, the storm came. The wind howled through the cemetery, rattling the iron gate. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the earth to mud. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the rolling clouds above. Max lay trembling, his body weak, his breath shallow. But even as the storm raged around him, he did not move. Then, crack, a deafening sound ripped through the night. The old oak tree beside Henry's grave groaned, its roots straining against the soaked ground. Max lifted his head just as another bolt of lightning flashed, revealing the terrifying truth. The tree was falling, right toward Henry's grave. Max leaped up, barking wildly, his instincts screaming at him to run, to flee. But he didn't move. He couldn't. His heart pounded as the massive tree tilted, the roots finally giving way. And then, a sudden, powerful gust of wind blew through the cemetery. The rain shifted direction, and with it, the falling tree wavered, just for a second, just enough. Instead of crashing onto Henry's grave, the trunk lurched sideways, slamming down just inches away. Mud and leaves exploded into the air as the earth trembled beneath the impact. Max stood frozen, his ears pinned back, his breath quick and shallow. Something had just saved Henry's grave. And then, Max smelled it. Sawdust, pine wood, the scent of Henry's workshop. His heart clenched, and suddenly, as if guided by something unseen, he turned. Standing just beyond the cemetery's iron gate was a shadowed figure, a man in a long coat, holding an umbrella. His face was partially hidden by the darkness. But Max knew. He knew. The man lifted a hand and gave a soft whistle, the same whistle Henry used to call him home. Max's breath hitched. His paws moved before he could think, carrying him toward the gate, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached it, pressing his nose through the bars, desperate. But the man was gone, vanished into the night, and yet the scent of sawdust lingered. Max tilted his head back and let out a long, mournful howl. But it was not just a sound of grief. It was something else, something lighter. As if a weight had finally lifted, and for the first time since Henry's death, Max knew it was time to go. The next morning, when Mr. Benson arrived to check on Max, he found the grave empty. The golden retriever was gone, but Max's story did not end there. A week later, at the lake Henry loved so much, a woman named Sarah found him sitting on the wooden dock, watching the sunrise. She had seen the news articles, heard of the loyal dog who refused to leave his owner's grave. She had also lost someone, her husband, 2 years ago. The silence in her home had been unbearable, the loneliness pressing down like an invisible weight. Now, as she stood on the dock, she reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of bread, kneeling slowly. "You hungry, boy?" she asked softly. Max hesitated. His ears twitched. His tail moved, just slightly. Then, for the first time in weeks, he took a step forward. Sarah smiled, and as the morning sun painted the lake in golden light, Max finally walked away from the past, towards something new, something Henry would have wanted.